I want to, you know.
Welcome to Men's Net. We're glad you're with us. My name is Mel Feit. I'll be hosting your show. Tony Nazzaro is the executive producer. Okay, we're going to revisit a topic that we've looked at before on this show, and it's worth another look, and that is a problem known as parental alienation. Essentially, it's the brainwashing of children by one parent against the other parent, usually within the context of a custody battle, and usually, though not always, but usually it's the custodial parent, the mother, who teaches her children to hate and despise the father when he's done nothing to warrant that. And in severe cases, the children will refuse to have anything to do with their father. The consequences here are tragic. So we're going to look at why it happens, how it happens, and what can be done about it. Now, I think the problem is getting worse, and I think it's getting worse because it is symptomatic of divorce. Most divorces are initiated by women, and I think women bring to divorce traditional expectations. You know, she expects to get custody of her children. He will have visitation. She expects that she will live in the home that was their marital residence. He will move out. She expects to get a sizable child support award. Essentially, she expects that she'll maintain the lifestyle she had while she was married, only now she'll be free. He will also be free, but he'll be living in his car, which won't be free because the family automobile will be given to her in the divorce settlement. And as more and more men have said no thank you to this arrangement, and they fought back and they've demanded custody of their kids, some women have invented creative strategies to stop a man in his tracks. The false accusation of child abuse, a very effective way to separate a man from his children, and if that doesn't work, then she has the ultimate weapon, turning his children against him. You can think of parental alienation as a culmination of false accusations repeated often enough so that they come to be believed, and I believe that most of the victims of false accusation and alienation are men and their children, but our panel may not agree with me on that, so let's get right to it. Okay, joining us, we have a great panel. Joining us to have this discussion is Dr. Amy Baker. Dr. Baker is a psychologist with expertise in developmental psychology and parental alienation, and she's the author of this book, Adult Children of Parental Alienation Syndrome, Breaking the Ties That Bind. This is a substantial contribution to this field, and it is universally well received, and we are delighted to have Amy on the panel. Thank you for being here. Also on the panel joining us is Rich. Rich is a New York City firefighter, one of New York's bravest. A hero of September 11th, he found himself alienated from his two teenage daughters, and then he did something remarkable. He went to court and fought for custody, and the story of what happened next is fascinating. We welcome you to the panel, Rich.
Thank you.
And rounding out our panel is Jackie Harounian with the law firm of Whistle & Harounian and Associates, and I think it is the best law firm in family matters anywhere in the New York City area, and Jackie has expertise in family law and matrimonial law, and she brings her legal expertise to our panel, so thank you, Jackie, for joining us.
Thank you.
Amy, you and I have talked. I take it you do not agree with my introduction that most of the victims are fathers.
Correct. There's simply no national data, one way or the other, to support or to document what proportion of targeted parents are fathers versus mothers. We don't know. What we do know is that Richard Gardner, the person who wrote the seminal book on this topic and did the original research, even he concluded at the end of his career that it was probably 50-50, that the gender gap that he had seen originally had closed. We also know, absolutely from research, that there are parents out there, mothers, who are targets of parental alienation. And we know that from research with adults who I interviewed who say, yes, when I was a child, I was manipulated by one parent to reject the other parent. And some of them said, it was my mother who turned me against my father. Others said it was my father who turned me against my mother.
Right. Now, I don't disagree with you that mothers can be victims, but here's my indirect evidence. My indirect empirical evidence that says that most of the victims are fathers. The opposition to understanding about parental alienation comes from women's groups. Men's groups and fathers groups are out there saying we have to pay attention to this. Women's organizations are saying it doesn't exist, it's bogus. Now, if women are victims of this, why are organized women's groups saying it doesn't exist?
Because the fathers' rights movement, unfortunately, has, I believe, come to the wrong conclusion about the solution to the problem. Because they believe this is something that happens to fathers, they believe the solution is to have 50-50 custody of all kids as the default position, because they believe, wrongly in my position, if you just have your kids 50% of the time, you are de facto protected from parental alienation, even though my research shows you could have 50-50 custody and still lose your kids. But because the fathers' rights movement is pushing for shared custody, the women's rights movement is pushing back.
So it's the opposition.
They don't want default, automatic shared custody for every child.
All right. Now tell us how it happens. And here's the thing: I know about this topic, but I don't understand how it can happen that a child would come to believe really horrible things about a parent. At some point, doesn't a child have some desire to bond with a parent, to feel some affection? Wouldn't the child begin to question, is this true? How did they come to believe false?
Well, it's shocking, right? And you know, one of the things that my research shows is that the kids who do succumb to the pressure to choose sides and do ally with one parent against the other often were allying with an abusive parent. They were actually choosing a parent who was sexually, physically, or emotionally abusing them as opposed to siding with the better parent. And it's hard to believe. But it does happen because alienating parents use the same thought reform and emotional manipulation techniques that cult leaders use. And just think, no grown-up wakes up one day and says, gee, today's the day I want to cut off my friends and family and give up all my money and starve myself by standing in an airport selling flowers for nickels so the guru can have another Mercedes. And yet it happens, doesn't it?
So you can so you can think of the alienating parent as an abusive parent, and that essentially the child who's the victim of the alienation is bonding with an abuser? Is that
Absolutely.
Okay. Tell us what happened, Rich, with you have 2 teenage daughters who simply refuse to have any contact with you whatsoever. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. To go along with that, I think it's brainwashing. It's like what you have in prisoner of war camps, where they have total control over the other, over the prisoner, and the basic life support stuff like feeding and shelter, and we've had men who are brainwashed in prisoner of war camps, and this is, as a parent is a god to these kids.
Well, your children would have nothing. Would they talk to you? Would they visit with you? Would they look at you? I mean, what was the extent of the alienation?
No, they would argue with me. They would not have anything to do with me. They were kept away from me. They wouldn't return calls. They were told basically anything that I did was wrong. Anything that I did was bad. You know, I'm a fireman, and like lots of other firemen, we try and do the right thing. But anything that I did, this person turned around. And I tend to agree. It's not a gender thing. I don't know what the percentage of it is, but we have, I have friends that it happens the other way. The father does it, and it has to do with the parent wanting total control over these kids.
I think the reason why it's important to actually understand what gender is affected, because we're looking for societal solutions, and I think there's a gender component to this, and which is why I raised it. But all right, you went to court. You did something remarkable, because people said you have 2 adolescent girls. They don't want to have anything to do with you. No judge is going to give you custody of 2 teenage daughters. You sued. You sought custody. What happened?
I won the case. We had a trial. We had testimony of psychologists, and I was observed with the kids in various situations, and they found out that I was the better parent. We had an appeal to that, and I won on the appeal.
Now, why are your children not here with you now? If you won and you got custody, why are you still estranged from your children?
Because the other parent still had control.
How did you get control? If the children, did the judge order you to get custody?
Yes.
And did the children come live with you?
Yes, but there's a couple of things in that. One part of it was that I was told if the part of what happens is the children get to be a certain age, and then there's nothing that can be done legally.
But they were under 18, yes?
Yes.
And the judge said that you have custody, and the mother retained custody, and the courts did what?
I had custody, and the mother kept undermining the custody.
Why is she not in jail?
That's a good question.
Well, that's the question. Why is she not in jail? Why did the court not enforce the order? And I want to ask Jackie that. That's where Jackie comes in. Here you have a court order. A judge saw what happened. and ordered that he should get custody, and nothing was done about it. And so the question is, why even